You think a hive city stands on rockcrete and iron. It does not. It stands on the people too poor to climb out of its foundations, and it grinds them fine to keep its balance. Hive Tarn rises 40 kilometers into the sky. At the very bottom, below the last level that still has a name, there is a lake of poison the city has been pouring out of itself for 10,000 years. People live on its shore. People work in it. People are born owing the air above it. The hive calls them the Underhive, as though they were a place and not a multitude. And it is easier for everyone up the levels if you think of them that way too. Cael Drenn was born 2,000 meters beneath the lowest window in Hive Tarn, and he was put to the sump before he was tall enough to weight it. He never saw the sky. He spent his whole life trying to buy a piece of it for someone else, and he kept an account of exactly what it cost him, because the hive had taught him that everything is counted. This is what a life is worth, counted from the bottom up, and this is who does the counting. I learned what I was before I learned to read, and I've never been allowed to forget it. My name is Cael Drenn, Sump-hand Dross gang of Habstack 11, the 900s in the Underhive of Hive Tarn, and I was born owing. Everyone down there is born owing. The hab my mother bore me in was rented, and the rent ran from the hour of my first breath, charged by the day whether the day fed us or not. The air had a tax on it, because the recyc fans that kept the sump fog thin enough to breathe were owned, and what is owned is charged for. The water came metered. There was even a levy on the dead, a clearance fee for the slag vents, so that a man too poor to live was also, at the end, too poor to be burned without it being written down as a debt his family inherited. By the time I was old enough to understand numbers, I understood that I had arrived in the world already in debt to it, and that the debt was the point. We lived in the 900s, which is what we called the sub-levels that no longer had names on the hive's charts, only numbers, and ours was a high one. Below us there was nothing but gantry and pipe, and then the sump. Above us there were 900 levels of other people's floors, stacked up and up into a smog we could not see past. And somewhere unimaginably far above that, the people who owned the floors, and the rent, and the air, and us. A man from the tithe office came once a cycle with a tally slate and a pair of gangers to read what we owed back to us, and he never once spoke a word that was not a number. He did not have to. The numbers said everything the hive wanted us to know. You are this much in arrears. The arrears have grown this much since last cycle. There is no figure in this column that has ever gone down. Had a designation before I had a name my mother chose. Every child born to the tithe is entered on the slate at the first breath, a string of letters for the stack and the level, and a number for the order of your arriving. And mine was read back to me so often by clerks who could not be troubled to ask what I was called that I knew it before I knew my own face. The hive did not need my name. The designation was enough to charge against, and charging against me was the only dealing the hive and I were ever going to have. I asked my mother once, what was at the top? She had never stood higher than the level she was born on, and neither had her mother before her. She thought about it a long time. People who do not have to look down, she said. That was the whole of what she knew about the top of the world. and it turned out to be the truest thing anyone ever told me. The sump was the bottom of everything. Whatever the hive ate, whatever it burned, whatever it could not use and would not pay to carry away, it let fall, and it all fell to us. 40 kilometers of city draining into one black lake, and we lived on its shore and called it work. It was not water. It looked like water in the lamplight, flat and dark and patient. But it was the runoff of 10,000 years of manufactorum and hab and slaughter. Chemical bleed, heavy metal, fuel sludge, and the acids the Uphive rinsed its machines with, and the low ash, and the tan-colored wash that came down whenever the rendering levels cleaned their floors. Under all of it, settled deep, lay the things too heavy to ever float again. A skin lay on the surface that threw back the colors of oil, greens and purples that were almost beautiful if you did not know what they were. The fog came off it in slow curtains, thicker on the hours the Uphive drained hardest, and it got into the rubber of your mask and it stayed. So that even in the hab, even asleep, you breathed the sump. The sump had a tide. That is the thing the Uphive never understood about the place, the thing you could not know unless you had stood in it. The city's draining ran heavier at some hours than others. Shift change and the scouring of the manufactorum floors, and the level rose and fell by a man's full height across a day. We learned the tide the way a fisher learns the sea, except that nothing in it was alive that we wanted, and the only catch was metal. Low water you worked. High water you stood on the gantry and watched it climb the marks we had scratched in the rock-crete, and you counted the hands that were not back yet. We weighted it for the metal. That was the trade. Everything the hive let fall, it would also buy back. Copper and brass off rotted cabling, ceramite shards, arco scrap, the heavy salvage that sank to the bed, and a man who could hold his breath and his nerve could pull it out of the muck and carry it to the way station and be paid in marks against his debt. Not paid. Paid is the wrong word, and the wrong word will kill your understanding of the place faster than the wrong tide. You reduced what you owed. On a good day you owed a little less than you had that morning. There were not many good days. They sent the children in first, where the water was shallow at the edge, because children were light and cheap and the rot took longer to find a small body. I went into the sump for the first time at 6 years old, holding my mother's hand, and she taught me the only law the sump has. Never go deeper than you can walk back from. Everyone who broke it taught the rest of us why, and the sump gave most of them back 9 days later to make the lesson stick. A sump hand owns 3 things, and the hive owns the man: a lamp, a hook, and a mask, and not one of them knew. The lamp was tin and bad oil and a wick you trimmed yourself, and it threw a circle of light about 4 paces wide, which is all the world a sump hand is ever given to see. The hook was a length of rebar beaten flat and barbed. For reading the shape of metal on a bed your eyes would never reach, and would not want to. And the mask. The mask I wore for 19 years was handed down to me from a man named Orley, who handed it down because the rot had finished with him and he had no more use for breathing. It was 2 seals short of tight. Every sump hand's mask is 2 seals short of tight. A clean mask, new with filters that had not already drunk a dead man's share of the fog, cost more than a sump hand earns in a year. So we wore the leaking ones, and we learned to take shallow breaths at the surface. And we measured the years we had left by the color of what we coughed up. Clear in the first years, then gray. Then the gray came streaked with black, and then you were Orly, handing your mask to a boy and telling him it was a good one. Work did not change from one day to the next, and that was its mercy and its horror both. A klaxon I felt in the deck more than heard. Down the gantries in the dark to the shore, 40 rungs, and a count I could have made blind. And I did, on the bad lung mornings, when the climb back up was the hardest thing the day would ask of me. Into the cold poison to the waist, to the chest, feeling along the sump bed with the hook for the shape of metal, hauling it up streaming and heavy onto the sledge, and again, until the shift horn called us out and the next gang went in. 12 hours to a shift, 2 shifts to the sump's tide. We worked the low water and we stayed out of the high, because the high water had taken more of us than I could count, and I tried for years to count. I stopped at a number I will not say, because saying it makes it sound like I knew them all, and I did not. Most of them the sump took before they had a name worth marking on the iron. I was good at it. I say that without pride. Being good at the sump only means the sump keeps you longer, and a longer life in the sump is not the gift it sounds like. It only means you are there to watch more of the people you love go into the black before you do. I had a sister. Her name was Nera, and she was 9 years younger than me, and keeping her out of the deep water was the closest thing to a purpose my life was ever given. Her mother went into the rot when Nera was 4. It is a slow way to go and not a quiet one, and when it was done, the hab and the debt passed to me, the way a hab and a debt always pass to whoever is left standing. I was 15. The clearance fee for our mother's burning went on to the ledger the same week, so that the cost of losing her and the cost of disposing of her arrived together, and I learned then that grief in the Underhive is itemized. Nera was small and quick and frightened of the fog, and she had a way of holding her breath without being told whenever the high water klaxon sounded, as though her body had learned the tide before she had the words for it. The gangmasters looked at her the way they looked at all of us, as a thing that would one day be old enough to send into the water. She was not like me. I had gone quiet under the weight of the place, the way most of us go quiet young. But Nera asked questions, and she kept asking them long after she was old enough to know there were no answers. Why does the air cost? Who decided the scale? What is on the other side of the gate the white light comes through? I never once had an answer that was both the truth and a kindness, so I learned to give her the kindness and keep the truth. And that became the shape of how I loved her. It is the shape of how I have told you this whole story. It was the only way I ever knew. The dross gangs were not cruel exactly. Cruelty takes effort, and the sump did the work for them. They were an arrangement. A boss they called the Waymaster held the gang, and the Waymaster answered to the rakers who held the level, and the rakers answered to a name we never saw that held the underlevels for the hive. And at every step the take went up and the marks came down. so that what reached a sump hand at the bottom was the thinnest possible slice of what his labor was worth. 4 marks in 10 the way station kept, 2 more for the air, 1 for the hab. What was left you lived on, if living is the word for it. I worked the deep water so Nera would not have to. That was the bargain I made with myself, and I kept it for as long as the sump let me. If I pulled enough out of the black, if I owed a little less each year, I could buy the one thing the Underhive sold that was worth buying. Not freedom. There is no freedom for sale down there. A level. One single level up, off the sump tithe onto a floor where the work was looms or rendering or anything at all that was not the black water. People did it. It happened. Maybe one family in 1,000 bought their way 1 level up, and the story of every one of them was passed around the habs like a relic, polished and retold and never quite checked. Proof that the ladder had rungs. I believed it. I had to. A man needs the rung he is reaching for to be real. There was a saying in the 900s, old as the habs. No one climbs out of the Underhive. I heard it first as a child, and I thought it meant the climb was hard. I spent 19 years learning what it actually meant. The way station was where the saying lived. It sat at the head of the gantries between the sump and the habs, a cage of iron and a great hanging scale, and a clerk behind a grill who never touched the water and never looked you in the face. You brought your sledge of dross. He weighed it. He named a number of marks against your debt in a voice with nothing in it, and he marked his slate, and the gangers at his shoulder made sure the number was not argued with. The scale was wrong. Every sump hand knew the scale was wrong, waited to read light by 1/10 or more, and not one of us could prove it or would have lived to spend the proof. You learned to read the clerk's hand instead of the dial, because the hand was honest about the dishonesty in a way the dial was not. Learn the arithmetic of the place, the way you learn the depth of cold, by living in it. A day in the sump, good and deep and lucky, might take 3 marks off what I owed. The hab put 2 back on every day, whether I worked it or not. The air put a mark and a half. By the time I had paid the gang its share and the recyc its share and bought the food that kept Nera and me upright, a good day left me perhaps half a mark ahead, and a bad day put me a full 1 behind. And there were more bad days than good. The debt did not sleep when I slept. It was the one thing in the 900s that never tired and never stopped. It was a word the clerks used for a debt, grown past any chance of clearing. Settled at vent, they called it, which meant the only payment the Hive still expected from you was your body on the slag vent and the clearance fee. Your family would owe for the burning. Most of the old hands were settled at vent, and either did not know it or knew, and did not say. I learned my own standing by accident from a clerk who read it off his slate without looking up, the way another man might read the weather if the Underhive had any. I was 26. I had been settled at vent, it turned out, since before I was old enough to wade the deep, to buy a level up, to clear the debt and pay the writ that lifted you off the tithe, cost what the clerks called a clean ledger, and 400 marks besides. I sat down once by lamplight, with a stub of chalk and the back of a ration tin, and I did the sum. half a mark ahead on my best days, the bad days eating the good. A debt that grew while I slept. I worked it through twice to be sure, because the first answer was so large I thought I had made an error. And the error was only that I had hoped. At the rate the sump paid and the hive took, I would clear the price of one level up in something over 200 years. I was 19. I have never told anyone that number. I did not stop trying, and I want that understood. I knew the sum, and I kept reaching for the rung because the alternative was to tell Nera the truth, and I was not strong enough to do that. No one climbs out of the Underhive. I had done the arithmetic of the saying, and the arithmetic was exact. I found the blue in my 3rd year on the deep water, and I have carried it ever since. And it is the only thing I have ever owned that the hive did not put a price on. It came up on my hook, off the sump bed, tangled in a knot of dead cable, a shard of something hard and glazed, the size of my thumb, and when I wiped the muck off it in the lamplight, it was blue, not the green-black of the sump, not the rust and sodium orange of every surface I had ever known, not the gray of the habs or the yellow of the lumens or the dark of everything else. Blue. A clean, deep, impossible blue, lit from inside the way nothing in the Underhive is lit. I stood in the poison up to my chest, and I could not stop looking at it. And for the first time in my life, I let the tide turn a hand's width past where I should have, because I would not put it down to climb out. An old sump hand named Vel told me what it was, or said he did. Sky glass, he called it. He said that very high up, higher than the hive, higher than the smog, there was a thing called the sky, and that on some worlds it was open and went on forever with nothing owning it, and that it was this color. He had never seen it. His grandfather had told him, who had also never seen it. None of us had ever seen it. It was a rumor we passed down in the dark, the way the faithful passed down the Emperor, a thing none of us could point to that we all agreed was real, because the alternative was unbearable. A roof you cannot buy your way above is easier to live under if you call it a sky. I took the shard home and I showed it to Nera, and I told her Vel's story as though I had any right to it. This is the color of the sky, I said. And one day when I have bought us up, we are going to climb until we can see it. And you will tell me whether the old man lied. She was 5. She held the blue shard in both hands as though it was warm. And she asked me how many levels up the sky was, because everything in her world already had a number of levels between her and it. And I told her I did not know. And she decided it was 900, because that was the biggest number she had. She slept with it under her cheek for a year. When she gave it back, she made me promise to keep it safe for the climb. And I promised, and of every debt I ever carried, that is the only one I broke. The rot does not announce itself. It is in the first breath you take through a leaking mask, and then it simply waits, and one day, years later, it presents the bill. Mine came due in my 12th year on the water. A cough at first, dry, easy to ignore, the kind every sump hand carries and calls nothing. Then the gray when I cleared my chest in the mornings. I knew what it was. Every sump hand knows what it is. I had watched it take my mother and a dozen others, and I knew the road it walked, because the road is always the same, and only the pace of it changes. The cough, then the gray, then the black, then the breathlessness that sets you on the gantry watching younger men work the water you can no longer enter, and then the slag vent and the clearance fee. The medics in the 900s were not medics. They were old sump hands with a tray of salvaged tools and a trade in easing the end. And the one I went to, a woman named Sash who had taken more lungs off the dead than any apothecary in the hive, listened to my chest through a tube of beaten copper and did not lie to me. 11 years, she said. That was the average. 11 years on the dross before the rot closed a man's lungs, and I had worked 19. And she looked at me the way you look at a man who is overdue on a debt that does not take marks. You are living on borrowed breath, she told me, and you are spending it in the one place that takes it fastest. She could give me a paste that loosened the chest and a count of how it would go. A year, perhaps 2, of working the shallows. Then the gantry. Then the bed. Come out of the water, she said. Find dry work. She said it the way you say a thing you both know cannot be done gently, so the lie would not bruise. There was no dry work. We both knew it. Dry work was a level up, and a level up was 400 marks and a clean ledger and 200 years, and I had a few left, if that. I went back into the sump the next shift. I had Nera to lift, and a promise about the color of the sky, and a body that had quietly begun to itemize what I had spent on both. The cough got worse on the schedule Sash had given me, almost to the cycle, as though it too were keeping accounts. I worked the low tide, and I prayed over the high, and I did not tell my sister that the sum had changed, that I was no longer racing the price of a level, but the closing of my own chest, that the rot was winning, because the rot always wins. That is what it is for. I used to think the Underhive was where the city threw away what it did not want. I had it backwards. The Underhive is not the hive's waste. It is the hive's stomach. We were not thrown away down there. We were digesting. I worked it out slowly, the way you work out anything true down there, from the numbers. The city above us ran on metal, and metal is dear, and every scrap we pulled out of the sump and sold back was metal. The uphive did not have to mine, or buy, or ship down 40 kilometers of freight spine. We reclaimed it for the price of our own lungs, which the hive valued at nothing, because there was always another sump hand, and the air tax meant we paid the hive even for the breath we were spending in its service. I once heard a raker say, not knowing or not caring that I could hear, that the underlevels of Hive Tarn returned more reclaimed ceramite in a year than 3 manufactorums made new, at a fraction of the cost, and that the only thing it took to run was people, and people were the one thing Tarn had a surplus of. He said it the way you would talk about a good machine. He was not wrong. That is what made it unbearable. He was not wrong. That was the moment the saying finally opened itself to me. No one climbs out of the Underhive. Of course not, we were never meant to. A sump hand who climbed out was a filter that had walked off the job. The whole arrangement, the rent that ran from your birth, the air you bought back from them, the wrong scale, the writ priced at 200 years. None of it was cruelty and none of it was neglect. Cruelty and neglect are accidents. This was a design, a machine, built to hold exactly enough people at the bottom of the world to digest the city's poison back into wealth, and to make certain that never quite enough of them climbed out for the machine to feel it. The ladder had rungs. It had just enough rungs, set just far enough apart, that we would keep climbing and keep reaching and keep feeding the sump our breath and call the reaching hope. The one family in 1,000 who bought their way up was not the exception to the machine. They were a part of it. They were the rung you could see, kept polished, so the rest of us would not stop climbing. I did not even hate them for it in the end. You cannot hate arithmetic. I only understood at last what I was. Not a man the Imperium had forgotten. A man the Imperium had counted and costed, and found more useful as a filter than as a person, and filed, and left exactly where it needed him, at the bottom, holding it up. The sump kept what it took for 9 days. On the 9th day, on the turn of the deep tide, it gave the dead back. It always did. I never learned why 9, only that you could set a clock by it, and that the gangs knew to work the far shore when the tide was due to turn, because the dead came up where the deep current let them go. They came up slow, in the night, water, pale and swollen and wreathed in the chemical foam, and they came up facing the dark ceiling of pipes where the sky should have been, every one of them, as though even the drowned were still looking for it. We did not leave them. That was the one tenderness the 900s kept, and we kept it without being told to, which is more than the hive above us could say of any law it wrote. Whoever's gang found a body brought it in, and we took the augmetics the sump had not eaten for the medics to reuse, because a dead man would rather his iron lifted a living one than rusted on the bed, and we burned the rest on the slag vents, and we marked the name on the iron, if we knew it. I carried more people out of that water than I can count. Some of them I had known. One of them I had taught to wade. There were other things in the deep sump. I will not dwell on them because this is meant to carry you down into sleep and not hold you out of it, and because the worst of the Underhive was never the things in the water. It was the arithmetic on the shore, but they were there. Things that had been people once and were something else now, changed by 10,000 years of poison into shapes that belonged to the dark, that did not come up on the 9th day because nothing called them up, and nothing they had left wanted the sky. They kept to the deep, and we kept to the shallows, and the law my mother taught me held the line between us. Never go deeper than you can walk back from. The sump did not need teeth. It only needed to be patient and to be deep, and to be the one place a man at the bottom of the world was allowed to earn his breath. Nera turned 14 that year. In the 900s, 14 is when the gang comes for you, and they came for her on a tally slate, with her name already written in, because the hive had been counting her since the day the clearance fee for our mother told it she existed. I tried to climb. Once. I want it on the record that I tried, because everything after is easier to carry if you know that I tried. When the Waymaster's men came to put Nera on the tithe, I did the one thing I had not yet done. I took every mark I had saved against the writ, years of it, the half marks of 1,000 good days hidden in a tin behind a loose rivet where even I had to work to reach them, far short of 400, but all that I had, and I carried it up the gantries to the gate. There is a gate near the top of the underlevels, where the Underhive ends and the hive proper begins. White light comes down through it from the lawful levels, the first white light I had ever stood in, and it hurt my eyes. And standing in it, I understood that I had lived my whole life by the color of bad oil, and never once known it. On the other side of the grill stood a guard in clean armor who had never breathed the sump in his life, whose mask, if he had ever owned one, had been new. I showed him my marks. I told him about Nera, about her age, about the rot in my chest and the price of the writ, and I asked him to take what I had and let one girl through. One. Up off the tithe before the water got her. He was not cruel either. I have noticed that about the people who run the machine. So few of them are cruel, and it would be easier if they were. He looked at my marks, and he looked at me, and he told me, almost gently, that it did not work that way. The writ was the writ. The price was the price. A clean ledger and 400 marks, and I had a filthy ledger and a fraction of the sum. And rules were what kept the hive standing. He did not even take the marks. A crueler man would have taken them. Go back down, he said, not unkindly. Go back down. And he meant it as a mercy, I think, because the only thing worse than the bottom of Hive Tarn is to stand for one moment in the white light at the gate and understand completely that you will never be allowed through it. I went back down. They put my sister in the sump the next week. I taught her to wade myself because I would rather it was me than anyone, and I traded 3 months of marks for the tightest mask I could find for her, and it was still 2 seals short, because they all are. She was good at it. She had my hands and my mother's way of holding her breath at the klaxon, and she went into the water with less fear than I ever had, which I told myself was courage, and knew was only that she had grown up believing the sump was the world. I have never been sorrier about anything in my life than I was about that. Nera went into the deep water in her 3rd year on the dross. She was 17. It was not the rot. The rot is the slow mercy, the one that lets you put your affairs in order and hand down your mask. And the sump did not give her the slow mercy. A sledge line parted on a high tide, frayed in a place the way station would not spend the marks to replace, and the load took her off her feet, and the deep took her, and she did not come back to the shallows. I was on the shore. I was too far to reach her and too rotted to swim, and I stood in the poison up to my chest, the same poison I had spent 19 years pulling a living out of. And I watched the black water close over the only thing I had ever tried to save, and it did not so much as change the color of the surface. The sump took her the way it takes everything, without effort, without a mark. The tide came up that night to the height I had scratched in the rockcrete as a boy, and went down again, and the marks did not know the difference. 9 days later, on the turn of the tide, I went to the far shore, because I knew the law of the 9 days, and I waited, and the sump gave her back. I carried her in myself. I let no one else touch her. I took nothing for the medics, though she had good hands and the iron in them would have lifted someone, because I could not, that once, do the arithmetic that the 900s runs on. I burned her on the slag vent, and I marked her name on the iron beside our mother's. And the clearance fee went on to my ledger before her ash was cold. And then I went back to the Hab, and I took out the blue shard, and I held it up in the lamplight to look at the color of the sky I'd promised to climb her toward. I could not remember if it was right. That is the thing the Underhive does to you last and worst. I had told her it was the color of the sky. I had built 19 years of reaching on it, and sitting there with it in my hand, I couldn't remember why I had ever believed that a chip of poisoned glass off the sump bed was the color of anything but the sump. Vel was dead. His grandfather was dead. The sky was a rumor passed down by the drowned, and I'd passed it to a girl, and she had slept with it under her cheek for a year, and it had not bought her one single level, one single breath, one single day. I put the shard away. I did not look at it again for a long time. It was just blue. It had always been just blue. I'm telling you this from the gantry now because the water is finished with me. My chest is mostly black. I cough in the night, on Sash's schedule, almost to the cycle she gave me, and the gang has stopped expecting me at the klaxon. I have a season left, perhaps, and I am spending it the way the old ones spend the end, sitting above the sump where I was born, watching the next gang go in, keeping the only account I have left to keep. There's a boy down there at the edge of the shallows. He is 6, maybe 7. He is holding his mother's hand, and she is teaching him the only law the sump has, the same law mine taught me, in almost the same words. Because there are only so many ways to say never go deeper than you can walk back from. He is wearing a mask 2 sizes too large that some dead man handed down to him, and it is 2 seals short of tight, because they all are. In a few years he will find something on his hook off the sump bed, something the muck has been hiding, and he will wipe it clean in the lamplight, and it will be a color he has never seen before. And some old sump hand will tell him what it is, and he will carry it home and believe it. He will have to. A man needs the rung he is reaching for to be real. I gave him the shard yesterday. I told him it was the color of the sky. I told him that one day, when he had bought his family up, he would climb until he could see it, and he would learn whether the old man had lied. I know the sum. I have always known the sum. I did the arithmetic of the saying when I was 19, and it has not changed, and it will not change for him. I told him anyway, because the truth is the one thing the Underhive will not let you keep, and the lie is the only inheritance I have left to pass down. And a lie about a sky is still the kindest thing anyone ever gave me. And climbs out of the Underhive. We are not its waste, and we are not its dead. We are its floor. We are the thing it stands on, 40 kilometers of city resting its whole weight on the breath of the people it has counted and costed and decided it needs exactly where they are. Hive Tarn is still standing. It is standing on the boy now. It will stand on whoever the boy hands the blue to, and on whoever they hand it to after that, down here in the dark, at the bottom of the world, holding a piece of poisoned glass and a rumor of the sky. Never saw it, neither will he. I hope he never learns it.